So we have C-SPAN here, so we all have to behave. Good morning. I'm Linda Feldman, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is Shalanda Young, Director of the White House Office of Management and Budget. This is her first appearance at a Monitor breakfast, so welcome.
Thank you.
Director Young hails from Clinton, Louisiana, and earned degrees from Loyola University New Orleans and Tulane. She worked on the Hill for many years, most recently as Democratic Staff Director on House Appropriations. And in 2021, she became acting OMB Director, and a year later was confirmed easily by the Senate, including 14 Republican votes, which...
I picked up one from deputy to big
yeah,
job.
There you go. In this day and age, that's something. Director Young was a key negotiator in the debt ceiling talks last year, and we'll be interested to get her take on all the government funding issues now urgently on the table. So, again, welcome. Now for the ground rules. We're on the record here. Please no live blogging or tweeting. In short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. And once the session ends at 10 o'clock, there is no embargo. We'll email pictures and a rough transcript from this breakfast to all reporters here shortly after the breakfast ends. As you know, if you'd like to ask a question, just send me a signal, and I will call on as many of you as time permits. And since we have a pretty big group here, maybe keep it to one question. Now, Director Young, if you'd like to make brief opening remarks, 5 minutes or so, the floor is yours.
So I haven't left staff world long enough to be a little long-winded, so I'm still,
Good.
I still know what brief
That's right,
is.
one-page memos, right?
Yeah, I still know what brief is. You know, I told some of you at the table during debt ceiling I ran out of clean laundry. I promise you I have enough built up for a very busy January and early February. I've seen a few of these rodeos before, and it is a tight, to say the least, just from a mechanical standpoint. How quickly can appropriators write to finish these first 4 bills by January 19th? Seems a daunting task at this point. Certainly, I know all of you saw the trip to the border taken by House Republicans. Some of the things that came out of that also further concerned me about the path they are headed towards in 14 days. This was all preventable. This was the reason we did the debt ceiling deal. The debt ceiling could have just been lifted, as historically been done before it was weaponized during the Obama presidency. No one wanted to see 8 million jobs risked. That is why the president agreed with House Republicans to sit down and talk about top-line budget numbers. Was that necessary to lift the debt? No. But one of the upsides was maybe we can get an orderly appropriations process out of it. Turns out we have a new speaker since then, and we have to remind people this budget agreement was not a handshake, it was a vote of Congress. It is not optional. They have to keep their word and live by the numbers that were agreed to by 70% of the House Republican caucus voted for the debt deal, 76% of House Democrats voted for that deal. And that is the only way to get appropriations bills done without the threat of shutdown. But 14 days, I'm typically optimistic. Don't mark me down as optimistic this morning, especially after some of the remarks I've seen over the last couple of days since the border, trying to conflate not only holding up Ukraine and Israel funding now for border, some in the House Republican Conference now saying shut down over border as well, which is not a great thing for the country. So brief enough. I think I'm under
Perfect.
5 minutes.
Very good. Thank you so much. So I'll throw out a question and then move around the table. So you may have seen that Raj Shah, Speaker Johnson's Chief of Staff for Communications, released his memo this morning saying that he's, of course, refuting the White House, saying that their fiscal 24 Homeland Security Appropriations bill increased funding for the border and didn't cut it. And he says that the White House $14 billion supplemental for the border is smoke and mirrors. So what's your response?
I'm not sure how more money for Border Patrol, more money for NI equipment, the equipment that detects fentanyl coming across the border, which everyone's fascinated with who's been in the border. I've been to a few in my day. In my day on the Hill, it was bipartisan to want to do more of that equipment. The president's request asked for more of that equipment, more money to install those of our land ports of entry, more money for agents, more money for asylum officers. I get it. If you want to close a border and not have an immigration policy, why would you want to fix it? We want to fix it. No, we don't want people waiting 5, 6 years before they get called in, have their case adjudicated. Not only is that bad for our border policy, that's bad for those families to come, get adjusted in this country, and then be snatched away from their communities. Some children, the only communities they've ever known. We have to do something to fix it. But you can't think that people should not immigrate to this country and want to fix this process. If you don't have that belief that we should have a functioning immigration process, you say no to all of this. And you're starting to hear the rhetoric, close the border. What does that mean? What does that mean about our immigration policy, not just our border policy? And there's something deeper there. And again, a few years ago, Republicans would have said sure to more asylum officers. We know that makes the system work better. Now you're saying just this willingness to not even have an immigration system that works even to get people legally through the system. That's concerning. And that doesn't leave a lot of room when there's just a fundamental disagreement of how this country's values are set to find some agreement with a problem we all see. There's just a fundamental difference in values, frankly, that is stopping this. And then we're going to argue about numbers. The numbers don't lie. Every time Republicans say they want to cut non-defense discretionary, guess what's in there? It is Homeland Security. When you cut the top lines, when you have a bill like Limit, Save, Grow, when you have a House Appropriations bill that cuts, that makes top line cuts of 20 and 30%, Homeland Security is a part of that. But we use these words like non-defense discretionary because most Americans don't know what is in that. That's Homeland Security, that is veterans, that is child care, that is Head Start, that is NIH. And when you start listing that, people go, well, why would we cut that? That is not the problem for our deficits. When they want to talk about Trump tax cuts, I'm happy to have that conversation. We did not get into this problem because we funded biomedical research or our Border Patrol. So that's my answer to that.
Okay.
I would be worried, too, if I put out a DHS bill and had my members vote for that. I'd be trying to correct the record, too.
Okay. Just one more. So I'm seeing reports that Speaker Johnson is floating direct negotiations with the White House. Are you going to be involved?
With regard to?
The changes to border security and immigration policy. So are you going to jump in and get involved in this? Or?
The last I checked, congressional leaders are having talks. There have been talks for weeks with Senator Murphy, Senator Sinema, Senator Langford. You know, I know where the Speaker's suite is. It's right next to the Senate. So it's a long trip down to the White House to do something that could be done right next door. The White House has been involved in those. There is a group meeting about these very important things. You know, he is a fellow Louisianian, so I'm going to use a charitable thought here, but you know, that is not serious. There are talks going on, and I'm sure no one's going to tell the Speaker if he wants to be involved in that he can't be involved in that.
Can the Louisiana connection be useful here?
He's from the north part of the state.
So that's all right, so.
But he went to school in Baton Rouge at LSU.
Okay.
My mother's an LSU grad, so I'll give him that. So he's visited down south. You know, Louisiana people are talking about north and south.
Right.
There is a geographical difference. But in all seriousness, Garrett Graves was a good partner in debt ceiling. I've known Scalise and his team for years in leadership. getting to know Johnson, but those personal relationships do matter. And whatever it takes to get through these next few weeks, we are willing to do. It baffles the mind that there is no acknowledgement that talks are happening on the Capitol.
Jonathan Salant from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at the outer table.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for coming. You know, I know we're talking about the shutdown, but you're also preparing the budget for 2024-25.
Don't remind me.
And is there concern, given the modest anniversary of January 6th, as you look into the budget, are you talking about new security steps funding you think you're going to need for the election, for the post-election, for the counting of the ballots and the certification next year?
Look, there's always this time of year. Even last year, we started funding leading up to just the normal planning around inaugurations, which includes security funding for the election for candidates. So that is normal course of action for a 24 and a 25 budget. And we work closely with Secret Service to make sure they have what they need, and make sure we are budgeting. But that is all. I've done that for the last 20 years in some way. There's nothing different in this in that landscape. As far as the legislative branch and security, they tell us what they need, and we don't analyze that. We just ask for what they tell us to ask for themselves. So nothing different and out of bounds of tradition are we thinking about with regards to how we plan for Secret Service's needs, how we plan for the needs of the National Capital Region. And on elections, we have put forward in our budget for the last 3 cycles a need for more election security money. This has clearly been in the forefront of American politics since Russia's behavior in 2016. We continue to look for a bipartisan audience with regard to election security. I wish it was bipartisan. It used to be. When you probably remember when the election commission was set up, that was after hanging chads. Things have changed. Then we said the answer to all of that is electronic. Now we realize we're vulnerable with all electronic, and we need to do something about that and provide assistance to states and localities to make sure that equipment is secure. But again, we continue to ask for that. Unfortunately, Republicans don't seem to be interested in our election security requests, but it's the right thing to do.
John Gizzi to your right from Newsmax.
Yes, Madam Director. You were certainly a player in all things economic in the administration, and coming up, we're told in fiscal year 2024 there'll be a soft landing and inflation minimal. Is there anything you see, any economic indicators out there from your perspective that could interrupt this soft landing and perhaps lead to some things unexpected that are bad for the economy?
Oh God, there is always, month to month, every piece of data, the economic team, no one has ever said we're on the right path without the caveat of, but there could be bumps in the road. Who even uttered the word supply chains before COVID? The Red Sea attacks, shipping, all of these things in the geopolitical space certainly have the chance and the opportunity to raise prices on the American consumer. Who knew what would happen to gas prices after Putin invaded Ukraine, our food basket? I don't think people realize how much food Ukraine produced until Russia invaded Ukraine. So all of these things, we are always on alert that we're on a good path to the soft landing, by the way, that most economists outside of government did not think was possible, and it's good to see them finally come around. Goldman Sachs, I think, was the outlier who saw how we could land the soft landing. And others have now appreciated that we're on that path. But yeah, I worry about the geopolitical space we live in this world, and what some actors, especially in the energy space, what that could cause and what American consumers could pay because of it.
All right. Tal Kopan from Boston Globe.
A viewer like mine, so it's funny that that we're back to back. Sort of piggybacking on that more broadly, what is the mood like on the White House economic team as you continue to get these good indicators? We got better than expected job numbers again today, and also, what's the economic risk? Tying it back to our previous conversation, if there is a government shutdown.
So I will respect the embargo of the jobs numbers. So glad you have them. I'm not talking about them from myself. But wow, job numbers have been consistently robust. Inflation has moderated in a way even the Fed recognizes, and you've seen their response to good PCE and CPI numbers with pauses. That doesn't mean we're done with interest rate hikes, but the Fed will make those determinations. So this hat trick of a soft landing, again, the geopolitical space makes me personally nervous. But the indicators we see every month, we're on the right path. We've seen some months where inflation didn't move. That we always want to see a downward trend. So it's gotten stuck a couple of times over the last year, but the trend line is very positive from the economic team. So we are cautiously optimistic. We have lunch every Friday, so I will see them later today. And I would say cautiously optimistic, but always looking for the next thing around the corner and trying to get ahead of it.
And the shutdown.
From an economic standpoint, or?
Yeah, potentially.
Most economists will tell you a shutdown has maybe a 0.01% effect on GDP that typically the economy picks up in the next quarter. So from a macroeconomic standpoint, it is certainly not even in the stratosphere of debt limit and how catastrophic that would have been. The one caveat to that statement is governance. We've seen financial institutions, those that responsible for credit ratings, look at that very closely with regard to the United States creditworthiness. And it is concerning that we continue to have a political system that does not show that it works in a smooth way. So my fear is that these governance issues, these potentials of a shutdown, shutdowns themselves, going up to the brink of debt limit, that will continue to play heavily in the minds of our credit agencies as they look at the United States creditworthiness.
Okay. Eric Wasson from Bloomberg.
You say you're a little bit pessimistic or not optimistic. Are you predicting a shutdown this month as far as that's concerned? And then we also have some reporting that the Democrats are willing to reopen the side deal, maybe accelerate the IRS cuts, look at some unspent COVID funds. Are you guys willing to do some tweaks to that side deal?
Just a quote, we'll shut down the government, we control the money. I mean, we didn't say that. House Republicans said it this week. So I've been taught to believe what people tell you and what they show you. And there are a growing number of House Republicans with this mindset. So I wouldn't say pessimistic, but I'm not optimistic. And I started this conversation with earlier this week in the border trip, left me with more concerns about where they're headed. And I can only read what, and this isn't, this wasn't some of the flamethrowers you typically hear this from. They weren't on the border trip. This is not a small fringe number of House Republicans. So I'm going to take them at their word on this one. and try our best to work with those who know this is a bad road for the country, and see if we can find what I like to call a coalition of the willing to do the right thing.
And on the side deal, are you willing to make some tweaks to that?
I'll start with the side deal was a part of the budget deal. Democrats voted en masse for this deal because non-defense discretionary would be left relatively flat. That includes the things that are unlocked in the appropriations process. Look, are the leaders talking to try to get the appropriators working? Yes. But from my perspective, this is, I hate that we use this term side deal. This was a part of the budget deal. We have to make sure non-defense discretionary remains at $772 billion, which is a relatively flat level to current spending. Without that, I'm not quite sure how they get there. And so I won't get ahead of what they are discussing. But from my standpoint, it is incredibly important to make sure that NDDs stay at the levels that we agreed to in the budget deal.
Okay. Gentleman with the beard, so right.
Yeah, James Politi with the Financial
James
Times.
Politi, okay.
There was a report in the New York Times this morning suggesting that the administration was open to allowing mass importation of drugs from Canada. Can you confirm that is a shift for the administration, and how much of a game changer is it in terms of lowering healthcare costs?
On this one, I don't typically like to say this, but not my wheelhouse. You know, and I'm hopefully smart enough to know when to say I'm not the best spokesperson for the administration in regards to importation of drugs from Canada. So I will let FDA and others speak to the details and what they see from a healthcare cost perspective.
Okay, let's see. Are you Aiden? Yeah, Aiden Quigley from CQ Roll Call.
Hi, thanks for coming. I have a follow-up on Eric's question about the decision possibility. Mm-hmm. If you were to kind of accelerate the IRS decisions, what effect would that have on the fiscal 25 process?
So, you know, as part of the budget deal, we agreed to allow the appropriators to rescind $20 billion in IRS funding. So from our purview, $20 billion over 2 or 1 year is $20 billion. And we have already worked with IRS to make sure that that does not impact their current efforts. And we feel confident that they can continue to go after high income tax cheats with a $20 billion reduction to the $78 billion they received in the Inflation Reduction Act.
Okay, Seungmin Kim from AP.
Hi.
Right here.
So I have two questions. First, on Ukraine, does the administration have any indication how much longer Kyiv can make its civil service payments without any additional aid? Because obviously that's a big part of what the aid packages that they get from the EU and from Washington.
I don't have the exact figure. Clearly, we are worried about this. The good news is we provide a smaller portion of direct budget support, which goes through World Bank, that, as you pointed out, is used to make sure their government continues to function. The partnership provides 60 to 70% of those funds. We're closer to 30%, and when it comes to military equipment, that percentage switches. So there's not an immediate problem, but you know, clearly a deficit of $1 billion a month is going to start having an impact. It's not right now, but why don't we get back to you on the specifics? And really, it's Kyiv owns some ownership of that answer too, and I want to be just very precise because this is their government we're talking about, and so let us do some more due diligence with them, and happy to follow up.
And my other question is, back in October, the president sort of hinted at an alternate revenue source for Ukraine. He was asked about what happens if Congress doesn't approve additional funding. And he said, we can support Ukraine in the next tranche that we need, and there is another means by which we may be able to find funding for that. So what was the president talking about, and are there alternate sources beyond congressional appropriations?
I mean, I came from the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee, Congress must provide additional funding if we are to keep the level of support. Yes, DOD has some authorities, like their 331 authority, which we are using now, but that is not going to get big tranches of equipment into Ukraine. We clearly can continue to provide some of the support from our DOD personnel and advice and counsel, but I think Ukraine will tell you they need the large tranches of equipment to continue to flow in ammunition. That comes through Presidential Drawdown Authority. We have additional Presidential Drawdown Authority, but we have made the decision that without money to backfill that impacts our own readiness. So there is PDA left. But given this complicated world I've talked about a few times now, we're just left with no choice to leave that on the table because we don't have money to backfill our own equipment. And that is a very risky business to send equipment in which Congress has not provided money in which to backfill. And we made that very tough decision to not use all of our PDA because we don't have the money to replace it. Look, I know there are bills moving through Congress. I know McCall and others have a bill. We certainly are interested in talking to them about it. We have sent proposals and earlier supplementals that Congress did not take us up on. But clearly the time frame of seizing assets, selling them, sending them that money to Kyiv is not an immediate thing. That does not absolve the need to provide funding now. That is a future benefit to Kyiv I think we should look at and take seriously.
Okay, are you Jacob from the Washington Post? Perfect. You're out.
Hi, Director. As you mentioned, I'm Jacob Bogage from the Washington Post. The question, again, about rescissions and the way that would impact the Biden administration's build-out of the IRS over time. $20 billion in 1 year or 2 years is one thing, but to preserve that $69 billion inside deal in 25, there's a very real chance Congress will come back for more IRS funding. With the money that's been rescinded, how do you assess the ability of the IRS to continue building out and modernizing, both in terms of taxpayer services and enforcement?
Yeah, if you're asking, is it 20 or can you stop at 20? The answer is we have to stop at 20. That is a necessity to ensure that we can continue to undertake what I think is a game-changing opportunity to look at the top 1% and 2% in this country who do not pay what they owe because they know IRS is so understaffed that they can cheat the system and no one will ever come knocking on their door. That's why this president's committed to this. That's why it was in the Inflation Reduction Act, and $20 billion was the deal. Do we have to make sure 25 is smooth? Yes. And we're going to have to work out ways, just like we're working out now. Look, we're trying to get through the next few weeks. If $20 billion in IRS is a way to ensure that the appropriators can work, yes, but that does not mean we are giving more of IRS in 2025. People should not have that assumption because we are committed to making sure that this program in IRS is not just a short-term thing. It will prove itself and have real deficit reduction. If people are serious about deficit reduction, why would you cut something that conservatively is 2 to 1? $1 spent, 2 comes in, and that is conservative. Some people think it's closer to 8 to 1, 9 to 1. So these are the kind of conversations, rather than cutting Head Start, we need to do to be serious about our deficit.
All right, Dave Shepardson from Reuters, to your right.
Two questions. One, you said you're not optimistic about reaching a deal. Is that because of sort of how far apart the sides are now? Is it about the rhetoric of the Republicans or immigration?
Certainly rhetoric. I think those who are working in good faith, in leadership on both sides of the aisle, know a shutdown is bad. It's pox on all our houses. No one should be planning for a shutdown. It's irresponsible. But yeah, the rhetoric concerns me. I've seen Republican leadership who know it's a bad path, and you know what they do? They go into a conference meeting, they come out of it, and they're like, we're shutting down. And that has happened over and over and over. So while I think leadership understands this is a bad path, the question is, can they hold back the floodgates?
I want to shift gears to return to work on federal workers. You sent a memo last April to federal agencies telling them to step up in-person work, and the chief of staff sent something in August. What's the status of workers returning? What do you think of the federal footprint in terms of workspace? Do you think that needs to be rethought in this new world? And is the return where you want it to be?
Most agencies are closer to pre-COVID levels than I think people give them credit for. I think what has happened from a federal workforce standpoint, honestly, I look at my own agency, people don't necessarily have more generous telework policies. It was just pre-COVID, you had managers, it was not an accepted form of work. So it was allowed, it was on the books, people didn't take it or weren't allowed to take it. And now people are taking 2.5 days of telework through most places in the government. That's not a bad thing. We were encouraging that before COVID. With regard to footprint, we've always had a footprint problem in the federal government. One, this is a very wonky thing, but GSA has a way to manage the federal footprint that Congress is not supporting. So what happens is GSA collects all this rent. It's supposed to go in this federal buildings fund. They have flexibility to consolidate, manage like you'd want any real estate portfolio to do, have that flexibility. Congress, and I was on that end at the time, they go, well, we have higher priorities. So they take out of the federal buildings fund and they fund things like IRS, NIH. It just goes into the kitty for other things. So we've got to do something to fix that, because GSA is now left as a real estate manager with no money to do anything. And we have got to give them the authority to use the funds that government agencies pay into and expect results out of. We're basically handicapping our ability to manage our real estate portfolio, because for probably the last 10 years, that money has basically been siphoned for other important things. But we cannot manage real estate in this way, where GSA has no money to really make any decisions. And if you don't do it that way, what do you think Congress is going to do when you say, give me $200 million to consolidate versus putting $200 million into a program that they can write a press release for home? That happens. It's not the sexiest thing on the Hill. We've got to convince members that we've got to do, we need resources to manage this vast portfolio, including resources to consolidate and get rid of some of it. And we need to continue to, I talked to the GSA administrator about this yesterday. So it is high on my priority list to make that, to make that case. But I also know what the appropriators are dealing with, and it's hard for them not to reach into GSA and pull resources out.
Sabrina Siddiqui from the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you, Director Young, for doing this. I have two questions. First, just is it your sense, based on the visit to the border and where we are now, that a deal on the supplemental will be wrapped up in the larger spending talks, or do you think that there may still be a possibility?
Try as we may. Listening to the Hill, both sides of the aisle, you guys need to separate the two. They were separated. Now what do we see? This rejoining. you know, we have made the effort to separate, to give the supplemental its own space, the space it needs. The same players have to discuss these things, so maybe it's a capacity issue, giving them the holidays to really work out the supplemental. And then hearing the speaker wants to have now new talks when we have old talks. We want to shut down over the border, but we're not going to do the supplemental because that doesn't have enough border. It's a strange, they're not in the same conversation, but it clearly, anyone who's watched this sees a joining in not a helpful way of the regular appropriations bills with the supplemental and all being threatened to be held up over border policy that House Republicans clearly seem to be moving away from whatever bipartisan deal is emerging in the Senate. So it's concerning. And people always have to be very careful of taking hostages that are too important in the grand scheme of things to keep. And they are on the precipice of doing that with government funding. And we've seen this play out before. It does not work out well. And after 2 days, and seeing the impacts, and it is unrelated things to keep the government closed is a bad posture to be in. And I just hope people think about the rhetoric they use as they try to conflate all of these things.
And more than a dozen Senate Democrats have backed an amendment that would enact conditions on the military assistance to Israel that is part of the president's supplemental request. Those would apply to other allies as well, they say, but they're specifically citing the humanitarian crisis and civilian death toll in Gaza as part of their concern. Has there been any discussion in this administration about tying or creating some conditions around the weapons and military assistance that the administration seeks to provide to Israel?
Well, clearly we've heard from the senators, and we talk to members all the time, so we understand the concern. Look, we sent up our request. The Senate has to figure out a way, not just with border, how they write the supplemental. They are in the process of figuring that out. It has to get through the Senate. It will be a question as to how they navigate with the senators who wrote that letter, how they draft the supplemental. I know all of them remain strong advocates of making sure that our allies have what they need, but they have concerns. We've heard them, we've talked to them, and just like the other parts of the supplemental, including direct budget support, humanitarian aid, the Congress will do as the Congress does, and they will want changes to how we set up our package.
It sounds like you're not ruling out the possibility, though, of aid to Israel being conditioned in some way as part of this package.
Well, I'm not, I guess, going to get ahead of talks that senators are having by saying where they are and where I think this is going, because I think they need room to talk amongst themselves as a Congress to figure out the best way to make sure our allies have what they need, but also work through their concerns.
Courtney Rosen from Bloomberg.
Thanks. You've been talking about the Senate negotiations and emphasizing how the negotiations are happening there and not necessarily in the House. Any budget deal or spending deal is going to have to get approved by the House. Can you talk about what you're doing personally to build a relationship with the Speaker and what the President is doing? We haven't heard any public meetings between him and the Speaker, for example.
Certainly, one must always talk to the House, and I've been in rooms with the new Speaker, including talking about Ukraine funding and the necessity of that. I think the last time we were in the room together was on the Capitol with the Secretary of Defense and others, explaining this issue I talked about earlier, that people should not assume because we have more drawdown authority that we're going to impact our own readiness. It's not a political game. It is a readiness policy decision. So we have definitely had many conversations with the Speaker. Look, how these negotiations happen, none of them are ever the same. I was also in a room with only Speaker McCarthy's staff. No Senate staff are in the room on budget deal. That was all. That does not mean we didn't keep the Schumer and Jeffries teams and the House Democrats and Senate Democrats in the loop on what was happening. But everyone agreed that that was the best path to find a deal to have the White House and Speaker McCarthy's team in a room together. Not all the corners were there. And you can imagine if people wanted a border deal to come, there's no way Senate Republicans aren't talking to House Republicans, Senate Democrats aren't talking to House Democrats. So that it is not without precedent, including recent precedent, that only 2 of the 5 corners in Washington would go in a room and work out a deal that they are responsible for briefing and keeping in the loop their political parties who are not in the room. And certainly that's the expectation as to what is happening.
So I want to ask you a big picture question. The U.S. debt now tops $34 trillion. At what point does carrying so much debt become just completely unsustainable?
Look, we look at more than the sheer number, right? Okay. We look at our ability and the costs we pay to service that debt. Mm-hmm. Clearly, with interest rates going up, that always becomes more of a concern. Right. When interest rates were historically low, servicing the debt, we had a higher comfort level. So interest rates are a big variable in the economics team's comfort level of whether or not one country is carrying too much debt. But we, from a political standpoint, we've got to get serious here. Right. I talked to bipartisan members at Harvard when the new class started last December. And I said, let me tell you what's going to happen during debt ceiling. Everyone's going to have big talks about all these things that are impacting the deficit, and they're going to tell you they want to do something about it. By the end of that, you know what you're going to focus on? Non-defense discretionary. Cannot fix the debt or the deficit or even get on a path to fixing anything by focusing on the smallest spending amount. All you're doing is hurting people who depend on those discrete programs in that lane. So we got to be willing to tackle in a bipartisan way some of the cost drivers that are adding to the debt and deficit. And that also means, and you've heard this president, I think more than any other Democratic president, be willing to talk about taxes. Democrats ran from that for a long time. This president has pointed out the tax unfairness in this country, but that also means that also has an impact on our debt and deficits. He's been able to put out budgets that have deficit reduction because he's willing to take on taxes. He's willing to say the corporate tax rate's too low, that we need to have a minimum tax, that we need to close loopholes for some of our biggest companies. That alone brings in large amounts of revenue that helps fix our debt and deficit problem. That's not the only way. That's not the only place to fix it. But I tell you, we're not fixing it with this dialogue where we're arguing over the smallest pot of money available because it's easy to attack because it's non-defense discretionary and no one knows what that means.
Right, exactly. Annette Meiritz from Handelsblatt, did you have your hand up? Awesome.
I have a follow-up on, sorry, I think you cannot see me. I try to come I have a follow-up on Ukraine. Thank you for taking my question. I was wondering how much of the worry, how much does the situation in the European Union add to that worry? Because the financial military aids from the US depend on how much the European Union countries send to Ukraine too, or vice versa, right? So do you see the situation isolated from each other, and how do you see the timeline until the NATO summit in July, where this issue will be probably a top priority?
Yeah, clearly we are central to the allied relationship, the keeping of the coalition, and that is why we in December and now we speak in such dire tones here. Yes, Kyiv might have a little time from other donors to make sure they can keep their war footing, keep the civil service. But what happens in the EU and other NATO allies if the U.S. pulls out their support? I mean, this president has spent countless hours keeping this coalition together. Is the United States the glue that holds this together? I believe it is. So I'm very concerned that it's not just the United States resources that are necessary for Kyiv to stop Putin. It is what message does that send to the rest of the world, and what will their decisions be if they see the United States not step up to the plate. You've heard what Putin thinks. He said it. He has said, if the United States pulls out, I give Kyiv a week to live. A week. You know, so this is not, the stakes are not small here. And it's very concerning that our political process has gotten in the way of, I think, what 90% of members would tell you they understand. And they back themselves into a corner and ask for these other things. And by the way, we want to get there on border, but they're not going to get HR 2 and everything they want. And people have to know how to take a deal. And so, given the exactly what you laid out in what's going on in Ukraine, we have got to get to a deal, not start from scratch with new talks. I mean, this is dire. We are past the point in providing aid to Ukraine that certainly we bypassed my comfort level. And it would be a mistake not to think that it's not just about the United States, but what signal that sends across the world. And what happens after Ukraine, our NATO alliance is then tested. What happens when we're now at the doorstep of Poland? I mean, American troops, daughters and sons, what is the price we're going to pay versus what we're asking for now to keep that from happening? It's a no-brainer to me. And I'm just baffled. You know, I'm baffled that we find ourselves here. I really am. I think the president used the word stunned once when he saw what was happening with Ukraine funded. And that I still find myself in that place.
Casey Wooten from National Journal, to your right.
Hi. 1% automatic spending cuts that were part of the debt deal.
Yep.
How are you planning on that potential eventuality?
It'll be done. It'll be done.
And if Congress does do a full year CR, should it include language rolling that back?
So that is an interesting question on the CR. When people say, I want a full year CR, ask them what they mean. Because you can have a full year CR that completely complies with the budget deal, and, you know, it would not have all the details, and it's never good to have things on autopilot for 2 years. However, it's a lot less devastating than when you hear some Republicans, what they mean with a full year CR is they want a full year CR that just changes the date, that does not comply to the budget deal, meaning they want a sequester to take place. That is very damaging. So a full year CR, you hear it said simply, and it really depends on how it's written. One we'd be vehemently opposed to if it did not comply with the budget deal and required draconian cuts just across the board. The other, you know, again, you want programs to get a fresh look every year, but it certainly would be less damaging if it was a CR written to comply with the budget deal. Like the 1% cut, we have until April 30th before that happens. I don't know what else to, like, I don't usually find myself as a defense hawk, but given I seem to be the only one left in town, I can't even imagine people would allow a 1% cut to defense with all of this happening in the world. Stranger things have happened. Because right now, defense is actually, because we have not passed full year bills, it's not cut, but they certainly have not gotten the extra $27 billion the debt deal unlocked for them. That's concerning in itself. If Congress somehow tripped past April 30th and would lead to a cut of 1% to defense, I'm going to remain optimistic that people know that's a bad place to be in, and that cooler heads will prevail and we find a path to get past the 19th and February 2nd, and don't flirt with April 30th because it's not just non-defense. Hopefully I'm not the only person that sees as a bad idea to cut defense in a time like this.
Let's see, Allison Pecorin from ABC to your left.
Thank you for doing this. I know we had a bit of a discussion earlier about whether the supplemental and budget bills may be joined together. There's been some discussion on the Hill with leadership about their belief about what order those issues need to be dealt with. And I'm wondering if the administration has a position about whether the supplemental needs to move first if these bills are not joined together.
I'll take it however they can pass it. I mean, beggars shouldn't be choosy. And I'll take it how they can pass it. It just needs to be passed. We're past time to provide. The supplemental has been pending since September in many ways. In September, we sent up a smaller package knowing that there would be a short CR. We got nothing in September. So in my mind, even though we didn't send up the bigger one until October, this has really been a pending question since the end of September, and it needs to be dealt with.
Okay, Alex from the Hill.
Thank you. So along the lines of Courtney's question, Speaker Johnson this week said that talks with the White House and Senate were virtually every day over the holiday ongoing about the budget. If that was the case, can you talk a little bit about the nature of those talks, and also were you concerned then that Republicans would threaten a shutdown over the border, or have your concerns over that risen in the last few days?
Yeah, I didn't see what he said, but I'll say I know people have worked in good faith to try to get their appropriators working. I've been on the appropriations side. All you want is the green light to go. And once they get that, they can go quickly. And people are working to try to get that going. And I would call that all in good faith. But I go back to my concern. History has shown us that leadership can work in good faith, and then they go into a raucous conference room after a trip to the border, and the sentiment of the we'll shut the government down, we control the money, wins out the day. So yeah, the rhetoric this week has concerned me that is the path that House Republicans are headed down, even though I will say I think leadership is working in good faith to prevent a shutdown, just like I thought McCarthy did the right thing in September because he knew a shutdown would not be good. I think leadership tends to hold that belief because they've seen this many times play out, and it never works out the way some members who are in the Shut It Down caucus think it will.
Are you Deepa?
I'm Deepa.
From NPR.
Hi, Jackie. Thanks for doing this. I just wondered if you could describe a little further or characterize the relationship that you have with the Speaker, with the President has with the Speaker. They haven't had a ton of FaceTime, but just kind of talk a little bit more about how they're kind of forging that relationship, especially right now.
Yeah, look, it's incredibly important. The Speaker, certainly for myself, I'll speak for myself first. I came from the Appropriations Committee. The Speaker was not on the Appropriations Committee, so I did not have the opportunity to know him when I worked in the House. But being from the great state of Louisiana, one finds common ground quickly. So before he sat down during our first time meeting in the Situation Room, I let him know where I was from, and he took some. I think I said something. He took some credit for something I said as a good Louisiana public school education. So that does help forge what is needed in tough situations. I think he's an incredibly, just on a personal level, nice person. But he has a job to do. And he has a very complicated conference to lead. I may not know him well, but I know his conference fairly well, and certainly dynamics in it. And it's tough. They have a two vote majority now. I mean, that is effectively even. If you were in the Senate, there would be a leadership sharing agreement, frankly. But it's the House and majority rules, but that is barely a ruling majority. So I'm under no illusions that vote count and the complex nature of where the conference is and how he got to the speakership, he will have to do what it takes to do his job, which is to lead his conference, which is going to put us in very different places on a lot of things, including government funding. Even if he is trying to do the best he can, he's going to be pulled in a more conservative direction before we find our way to compromise. The president has a lot of respect for the institution. Senator for a long time, so I'm sure over time they will build a relationship. But that is not a snap of the fingers, and that will take time. And I'm sure I'm not aware of every time they've sat down in a room together or talked on the phone. So I would not deign to try and say how their relationship is, because it's not in my wheelhouse. I would not have knowledge of their conversations.
All right. Got 3 minutes till 10, so this will be the last question. Are you Liz Goodman from the Washington Post?
Hi.
Right to your head.
Thanks so much for doing this. I was wondering, on the supplemental, can you talk a little bit about the decision to add immigration priorities to that supplemental in the first place? Because that's something Senate Republicans have said, the White House is the one that put immigration on this, so that's why we're pushing for more.
We did. In our view, is a national security package, and this is a national security issue. Now, that does not mean we push to have H.R. 2 added. In a funding bill that says we need to make sure we're there for our allies, it is incredibly important to also say we need more resources to make sure the border is orderly managed, to make sure our immigration process works smoothly, make sure we can catch fentanyl at the border coming through. Like, to us, that makes all the sense in the world. The question is if people want to do something about it, are they making a political calculation that if they do something that, frankly, in my view, most Republicans would have found reasonable, just a little bit ago, now they're trying to extract something different. We're happy to talk about policy changes that make sense, that actually help with the migration patterns. But some of the stuff that has been offered doesn't even do that. It is just punitive by nature to immigrants. But we make no qualms. This was an important national security ask. We need more resources. We asked for money in December for border security, asked for more emergency money. We got half. We asked for more money. We linked them together in September. Not only did we not get Ukraine, we also didn't get any border money. You cannot be serious about doing something about the border and constantly say no to resources. You just can't. Smoke and mirrors, what does that mean? There are no how is more border patrol smoke and mirrors? I get it. There are some people who don't want to fix it because it is a good political football. And that is something that is unacceptable. If you want, just like President Trump, when he was president, I was on the Hill, staff director of the Appropriations Committee, he asked for more border money. to deal with the influx of migrants coming across. There are a lot of Democrats uncomfortable with providing that president with more money for his policies to perpetuate those. But most Democrats realize that you can dislike what he was doing, but to see children sleeping on the floor in those Mylar blankets, that wasn't going to get any better without resources. So they did the right thing and provided a president. They absolutely abhorred his immigration policies, more funding to make sure immigrants were taken care of. They didn't get the policy changes they wanted for a more humane policy, but they did the right thing. This is a moment in the reverse for Republicans. Do you want to do something about it or not? Do you want more Border Patrol agents? Do you want more ICE detention capability? Do you want more NII intrusive equipment to look at cars coming across? You don't have to take everything we sent, but there's something in that list you got to be for. What else is there? I guess closing it down.
All right, it's 10 o'clock. Promised a hard stop. Thank you so
and
much for
when people
coming.
see pictures, I have an eye-watering problem this morning. They're going to think you all made me cry. Make sure you tell them I have a sensitive side.
Well, anyway, thanks again for doing this, and I hope you'll come back.
Thank you. This was lovely. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It really is, and they kind of don't get along. Because my grandmother is like the center of everything. And now we got this new baby. And I was like, oh my God, are you two competing for attention? I did. And the baby stared her down and she stared the baby down. And it's like, oh my God. Nice and cute. Yeah, that is her. I'm like, there's an ache or a pain, she goes straight to the hospital. I've never seen someone with so much life. She's like, I'm still in this. Yes, my aunt lives with her. And she was characterized that way as well. For the most part, yeah. I mean, that's the company. She likes the company. But it's her house, her rules. She went to college in the 40s. Basketball, the first women's basketball. And I'm like, she's just kind of like, she went to LSU then. She was at Southern University at HBCU. Down the street. Yeah, still in play. He was at LSU the same time I was in high school. He was like, what high school did you go to? And we were, I think we were exactly 4 years apart. Yeah.
Are you going to have any beer? That would be interesting, some of the things.
Yeah. And he still should be in the not native phase of the job. He's a very nice guy. And Garrett, I got to know during Jen, and Garrett, my parents' conversation. No idea. I know. It's not bad. One of my things I got to do when I was coming through the promotional process, you know where Scalise used to sit? Actually, he might be back in that office because he loved it so much. That's not traditional minority leadership. Where is he? Oh, he went up there. So his old spot, Catherine Clark, was probably there. That was my office when I was lecturing. And it was leadership office, then it was probes, now it's back to leadership. And when I was in there, the Louisiana SEAL was there, Hell Boss said. And we almost had another speaker, Bob Woodman, days away. Yeah, that guy. Look at him. Wow. I love it. You got shrimp? Yep. I like shrimp. Yeah, so they tend to have like small but powerful delegations. I'm not one of those people who don't think it's a totally not an analogy. I think it's a simplistic analogy.
There's the other yeah, I mean, these are really, like, these for moments are the federal courts, so like, wait,
Most Americans still make a judgment about they certainly do it more and I'm about a lot more religious.
right, it's just, so anyway, but obviously, you guys have a few more